Germany invaded Poland. This act of aggression resulted in Great Britain and France declaring war on Germany on September 3rd, 1939. The war's origin can be traced back to unsolved issues of World War I and the economic instability during the Great Depression. Political issues, the rise of fascism and the aggressive expansionist of German policies. Italy and Japan also contributed to the outbreak of the war.
Here is shown the initiation of that phase of modern warfare. These pictures of the preparation for attack and later the actual combat were all made by German frontline cameramen. Therefore, they stress Nazi superiority. Success is unimpeded as Hitler's divisions move against outnumbered Polish defenders.
Britain had already begun to protect its civilians years before the war had started. Air raid shelters had been constructed on the streets and gardens of many towns and villages in case of air raid bombing. Everyone in the countryside had been given gas masks to combat the gas bombings the Germans would drop on British land.
Shelters is limited, but every householder can take measures for protection against blast and splinters. He can do the work for himself using scrap materials and earth. From any post office, you can get a booklet, price threepence, which tells you just how to make your home an air raid shelter.
The British government has evacuated all children, their teachers, mothers with children under 5, pregnant women and some disabled people to smaller towns and villages in the country. Children had been given gas masks, a small suitcase containing their belongings and a label with their name and destination in case they got lost in less than 3 days of the evacuation. Over 1 million children and adults had been moved to the countryside. In 1939, when the anticipated bombing raids failed to arrive, many parents whose children had been evacuated in September decided to bring them home again. By January 1940, almost half of the evacuees returned home. The government produced posters like this, urging parents to leave evacuees where they were while the threat of bombing remained likely. The countryside was a very difficult place for children to grow up in. They struggled to settle in, find friends, and even got homesick and missed their families. Life in the countryside is different from that of towns and cities. Children had to get used to a different way of doing things, new foods that they have never eaten before, attend new schools and fit in with their new family rules. This was a hard time readjusting, would find change difficult in small ways, such as schedule changes or taking a different job. These children had to leave their homes and life behind and live a new life that they may not be comfortable in. Although most children were homesick and found life hard, there were some children who did enjoy the fresh air and life that the countryside had to offer. Most families were kind and looked after them well. By January in 1940, the British government had introduced food rationing. This is due to it being the only way to ensure the fair distribution of food at a time of national emergency. When the Allied powers invaded Berlin and defeated the Germans, it marked the end of an era. The end of the war had left millions of people without a home or country. Most had been removed without choice from their homes, without being able to return. These people were often unwelcome in their new homes, even in immigrant societies such as the United States. The countries that had the first-hand experience in the war had been left in ruins that took years of rebuilding to restore. The rationings of foods remained for a few years after the war. The British Labour Party withdrew from the war and won a landslide victory, gaining them 60% of seats in the House of Commons. Britain had to rely on the United States to keep their economy stable. Lots of wartime debt was owed to them. However, the United States pulled their support program from Britain, causing the economy and the British government's plans to rebuild to derail. Most people after the war were left with scars, mental health issues, and most soldiers and civilians were left with PTSD, known at the time as shell shock.